Okay, good morning. Delighted to see that you have all emerged successfully from the red line. We increasingly are having red lines thrown at us, aren't we? With political as well as metro, local, but you've emerged successfully. It's good to see you all here. Again, as a matter of courtesy, if you'd be kind enough to turn off your cell phones. I'm Peter Ernest, the Executive Director of the Spy Museum, and I'm delighted to have you here for what will be an interesting program. This happened in most of our lifetimes, and it will, I think, resonate with you quite a bit. Our speaker this morning is Natalie Zanin. We have worked with her here at the museum before. She's a writer, director, and producer of educational tours in Washington. She develops them herself, and she does children's programs. And she's co-developer of what is our tour, that is the Spy Museum City Tour of DC, which is now we do in partnership with Gray Line, and it's now an on-demand. So if groups are interested, that can certainly be booked. She's been featured in a number of local outlets, Washingtonian Magazine, The Post, The Times, but also she's been on the History Channel, Canadian television, French television, USA, and a number of others. She is and has been director of the Silver Spring Inclusive Theater. And she has spent a lot of time on this particular case, which I must say I found fascinating. I was discussing it with her this morning. So, Natalie, we're very glad to have you here. Please help me welcome Natalie Zanin.
Wow, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Peter. Good morning, good morning. Yes, I'm Natalie Zanin, and I'm going to be talking to you about Cynthia, or Codename Cynthia. This is a very interesting woman. I call her a most unusual woman, but I find that she lived a very exciting life. In fact, when I did some research on her, I kept seeing it in terms of a screenplay, so I've started writing one. How do you build a spy? How do you create a spy? If you were to go into a laboratory and put in ingredients into a machine to concoct a spy, you couldn't come up with a much better one than Cynthia. All the elements are there. In her early life, she was born Amy Elizabeth Thorpe, November 22nd, 1910, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She said that she was of Irish Scandinavian heritage on her father's side and mixed French Canadian and Bavarian on her mother's side. As a child, Amy had a relative named Aunt Amy who lived with the family. And so, perhaps to avoid confusion, the family started calling her Elizabeth, and then later Betty. Betty stuck. She liked Betty, and the family liked that. Her father was George Cyrus Thorpe. He was a captain in the United States Marines. He served in the Spanish-American War with distinction. Her mother was Cora Wells Thorpe. She was the daughter of Senator Harry Wells. She was an educated woman, and she didn't mix well with the rest of Minneapolis society. I think she at some times may have felt that she was above them. She had studied at Columbia and the Sorbonne and the University of Munich. She was often referred to by little Betty as cold and aloof. In fact, it was difficult for Cora to display affection to her family. When I picture her now, I picture a cross between Margaret Dumont of the Marx Brothers films and the Dowager Countess from Downton Abbey. A little less friendly, perhaps. Now, it's 1910. George is stationed in Maine. He's commanding the naval prison in Portsmouth. The family will live here until 1914. Betty has a sister born in 1912 and a brother, George, born in 1914, and they are both born in Maine. Betty's childhood is interesting. She liked being outside. She liked to run through the Maine woods. She often said that she felt as though she were built around aloneness, but that was most comfortable for her. From the age of 4, she would hide among the large pine trees in the Maine woods. She would lay on her back and look up at the sky filtered through the pine trees. She would hear the water nearby, and she would stay there for hours and hours, sometimes all day into the evening. The family in the beginning got worried and would look for her, and then after a while, they alerted the local police. Well, the police officers knew the woods, they knew where the child would hide, and they would often go out, find her, and bring her back to her family in the evening. So Betty would spend her days in the woods. This didn't seem to bother Cora, but, it was a different time. Betty never had a best friend, never really confided in anyone. Her father was often away, and there she was with Cora and her siblings. Cora, again, unable really to hug the children or tell them that she loved them, didn't seem comfortable at all with the children. Betty sought escape. Now, in 1914, Betty and her siblings lived with Cora in Rhode Island. George was posted at the Navy War College in Annapolis, and then later at Brown University. In 1916, they moved to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was a social whirl for the Thorpes, and the children, I think, liked it here a lot. Betty looks back on this time with fondness. In 1917, George is posted to Cuba. Cora decides she will pack up the family and follow him there. As she is making preparations to follow him to Cuba, she arrives there and finds that he's been shipped to South America. Wonderful. This doesn't sit well with her. Picture Margaret Dumont now. She decides to stay in Cuba, where she stays until 1919. George being in South America. I think that worked well for Cora. Eventually, she takes the children to Florida to wait for George. They return to Washington, D.C. Betty begins keeping a diary of her day-to-day activities. Reads like this. Went to the Library of Congress. It is all marble and paintings. George and Cora move in powerful social circles in Washington. They give affairs at their home. In fact, a lovely party they gave for Vice President Coolidge and his wife. Betty observes them interacting with the social set here. She notices that manners can be useful. She observes that good manners are actually rather useful to hide behind. This is a skill that will serve her later in life. Betty now seeks to feel excitement. She's bored. Any kind of excitement, even fear. She wrote, I remember when we were very young and running races, I always ran past the finish line and ran and ran and ran until I dropped, half strangled when my endurance ran out. I just couldn't stop before that. My brother George used to go mad. You're crazy! You're crazy! He'd shout as I raced by. Why don't you stop? But Betty couldn't stop. Now it's 1921. George is posted to Hawaii. He is in command of the Marines there. The Thorpes begin to write magazine articles while they are in Hawaii. Cora writes a book of stories about the Pacific Island folk tales that's rather well received. Betty watches them, and she decides to start writing herself. She pens an article about her family background. She calls it Days Bygone. It's not really a family history, though. When you look at it, it's mainly about a ball given by the King and Queen in 1903 at Buckingham Palace that George had attended. So it's a description of the ball rather than being a true family history. But she's only about 9 or 10 at this point. And then she decides to write a more detailed story about a character named Fioretta. The story is quite good. George hires an illustrator, and he has Fioretta printed. It's a beautiful tale of a girl living on the streets of Naples, living with her blind father. Poor Fioretta. When the father becomes ill, little Fioretta sings in the streets to earn their daily bread. An impresario overhears the lovely voice, and he makes her a famous soprano. It's a great little story. For an 11-year-old, it's very mature. In fact, the slide that you see here is a photo of Betty taken to illustrate Fioretta. Some lines of Fioretta read like this. The sun had not yet cast its sunset robe over Naples, but it was sinking fast behind that ancient piece of beauty, Vesuvius, which nature had so thoughtfully bestowed upon the earth. It's great stuff. For an 11-year-old, it's good. Betty is already becoming a beautiful girl. The book, which is printed really only for family and friends to read, eventually finds its way to Washington. In 1923, Betty's family comes back to Washington. George is retired. They are making a grand tour of Europe, and when they tour, Betty studies French at the Institution des Arts above Lake Geneva. Betty is bored at school. She chafes at the routine of it. She gets into several dust-ups with the principals over her rebelliousness. She is said to be a bad influence on the other students. But her French was flawless, so points to her for that. She spends the next few years at several private schools. She preferred solitude. She had a careless disregard for conventions and rules, and she's asked to leave one of the schools. She's a blonde and beautiful girl. She's coming into her looks now. She writes in her diary, "My looks are better than I had hoped. God was kind in that, at least." I have to agree with her. I think she's stunning. Now the Thorpes are summering in Newport, Rhode Island. They have a vigorous social life among the yachting set, and they attend parties and host parties at their summer home. It is at one of these local gatherings that Betty meets a handsome young man of 21. His family is part of the social register. She will never name him in her diaries. And I cannot give you his name now, for I do not know it, and I have looked. Betty is smitten by this young man. She wrote, "I imagine myself in love with him. We were both lonely, and met only twice before the love affair was over. She was only 14. She claimed that she was seduced by her amour, but she also wrote, life is but a stage upon which to play. One's role is to pretend and always to hide one's true feelings. Now Betty's got a secret she cannot even share with her diary. Thus the spy is being created. What does a spy do? Hold secrets, pass them on to their handlers. Keep up a false front. Never reveal your true feelings. Mission comes above yourself. This is a good training ground for her. The family returns to Washington from the summer home. George establishes a firm specializing in maritime cases. And Betty becomes well known. Not only is she stunning, but she's a charming girl. She's learned how to flirt. Her little private book about the lonely and lovely voiced girl from Naples has been read by diplomats at the Italian embassy. They adore her. They make a fuss over her at the Italian embassy. In fact, the Italian naval attaché, Alberto Leis, in his 40s then, is especially intrigued with Betty, and he calls her his golden girl. They may have been only friends. I cannot find if they in fact were lovers, but she revels in the attention from this charming Italian. One day she's sunning herself beside a pool in Washington, D.C. She catches the eye of Arthur Pack. He apparently never got over that first glance. He was a commercial secretary at the British Embassy. She also flirts with a handsome Spaniard at a country club here. Just a moment, really, as the two gaze at each other while watching a tennis match. But it sparked something in Betty. As he left the club, the Spaniard bowed dramatically. Betty was in trance. As we ladies know, sometimes that's all it takes. A bow is very effective. Gentlemen, take note. She begins to write in her diary that this young man, this mysterious Spaniard, is her true love. All of the restlessness that she'd felt before, she pours into feelings for this man that she's really only spoken with once, and barely spoken with at that. It's interesting. Now she's going to be presented to society. This is very important to Cora. Betty has to make a good presentation. The year is 1929. Betty will be primed to make a good marriage. And by Cora Thorpe's standards, this meant the right sort of husband. It is at this point that Betty has an affair with a man that she does not name in her diary over the Christmas holiday in 1929. Then she goes to tea at her parents' home. They lived at 3218 Woodley Road, Northwest, here in the city. She meets Arthur Pack again. He remembers that first glance he had of her at the swimming pool. She writes in her diary, and I wonder, was this poem written to Arthur or the affair she had with the unnamed man? She writes, "I think I cannot understand the depth of wanting unfulfilled desire and hating you to touch my hand when embers die where once there was a fire." Now there is a party where Arthur, Joseph Pack, and Betty are house guests. This is still 1929. He walks into his room late at night, is tired, just wants to sleep. Turns on the light and finds Betty in his bed, naked. He told a friend he was surprised to find her there. I'll bet he was. They were married April 29th, 1930. This was a good marriage by Cora's standards. He's with the British Embassy. He's a solid, respectable person, a man of standing. But at the wedding here at the Epiphany Church on G Street Northwest, it's a beautiful space if you have a chance to visit it, Betty was 4 months pregnant at the wedding. Was this Arthur's child or the child of the unnamed man she had the affair with? The timing is interesting. When Arthur finds out that she is pregnant, and she kept it from him as long as she could, he's furious and he's terrified. This is 1930. A man whose young wife is pregnant at the wedding, this could derail his career. And like something out of Downton Abbey, Arthur first insists that Betty try to lose the child. Now, this is in Betty's words. She wrote later that Arthur insisted that she ride on horseback very fast, that she jump off of stairs, that she run until she was exhausted. I find this a bit incongruous with Betty's nature, however. I think this might be her looking back and reflecting on something that she's misremembered. Because Betty was a very strong person, and I cannot imagine her going through with this attempt to lose a child. At any case, she does become ill. And when she sees a doctor, he says, "You must stop whatever you're doing right now, because you will not only lose your child, you will die. You must take care of yourself." That's the end of it. So she goes forward. She has the baby. Arthur insists no announcement will be made of little Anthony George's birth. None. In fact, they will not raise the child. A family will be found. They place a notice. A family is found in Dorrington, England, in the village of Shropshire. They will raise the child, and Betty is never to see him again. Arthur will not speak of the child. He will not visit the child. Betty is heartsick over this. She really wanted the baby. She wanted to raise him. But he insists, no, this is the way it will be. No one will know. She makes furtive visits to see the child. She tries to observe him from a distance, but then later she visits the family. I'm not sure what little Tony thought of her as he was growing up, this beautiful woman who came and played with him sometimes, brought him gifts. Arthur takes no interest in him at all. At one point, the little boy wants to have a toy gun. Betty tells Arthur that she's going to send him a toy gun. This is the only time Arthur speaks about the child. No, absolutely not. He is not to have a toy gun. Betty then writes to the child and says she's sorry she cannot send him the gift that he wants. But now Betty has another secret to keep. She's becoming an expert at keeping secrets. No one knows the inner turmoil over her heartbreaking loss of the beautiful little boy. Arthur is now transferred to Chile. Betty embraces the tropics. She traveled there with her family when she was younger, and she loves it. More importantly, it gives her an outlet. She's grieving over the loss of little Tony, and she can throw herself into the social world, and she's so angry with Arthur. This is also a secret that she has to keep deep within herself. She's so angry with him over the loss of her child that she decides anything goes at this point. What is he going to say to her? What can he possibly do to her at this point? She learns to play polo. She learns to speak Spanish. She meets a handsome Chilean named Alfredo. They have an affair. It doesn't last long. She is out with friends, and she sees her lover Alfredo with a woman. Later, she confronts him. "Oh, this is my official mistress." Oops. Your official mistress? All right. We're done. But no, you understand. No, she's done. She's done with him. He has an official mistress? No. And she's furious with Alfredo. She feels betrayed by him. I think because she threw herself so much into the affair, and you see in her writings that she really felt that she loved him. I think she's pouring out the love for the little Tony, and it goes into her feelings for Alfredo. So she's just doubly betrayed by him. It is at this point that she becomes pregnant by Arthur, a little girl named Denise, in 1934. She loves Denise. She dotes on her at first. Arthur is transferred to Madrid. Betty loves it in Spain, but she soon finds herself swept up in the political turmoil here. A right-wing Catholic government is in power when the Packs arrive, and the country's heading towards national revolution. The Packs are on the side of Generalissimo Francisco Franco, and Betty feels unleashed here. She enjoys the freedom to do as she pleases. She is officially Mrs. Arthur J. Pack. This is a photo from her presentation to the Queen. I think it's a terrible picture of her, but there you have it. She's dolled up to be presented. She's at a club one day in Spain, and she sees a face that she recognizes from the past. He's a handsome Spaniard. He is the same handsome Spaniard from her childhood that she met so many years ago at that tennis match in Washington. She calls him Antonio in her diaries, but in fact he is Senor Carlos Sartorius. They actually run into each other while she is with Arthur Pack. Betty doesn't feel at all nervous about this situation. This is the man she loved for years, and now she's meeting him officially with her husband. She jokes in front of Arthur, "Oh, this is someone I had a crush on when I was younger," and Carlos responds in kind, "Oh, yes, we were terribly young and gay, and, I'm sure you've forgotten all about me." But in fact, she hasn't, and he hasn't forgotten about her either. How could he? They begin an affair. Carlos is married. Arthur is busy with work. At this point, Betty does something rather interesting to me. She decides to become a Catholic. She says that it's to please Arthur. But Carlos is Catholic, so I have a feeling that might have pushed her in that direction to please him as well. Sir George Ogilvy Forbes, the embassy counselor, encourages her to seek the counsel of a young priest to further her studies in becoming a Catholic. The priest and Betty meet. They have appropriate meetings. They converse daily about Catholicism. It is during this point that Betty and Sir George Ogilvy Forbes have to take an elevator to a meeting. During the elevator ride, he's asking how her studies are going with the priest. You know, she responds in kind, "It's going very well, thank you so much." And then the elevator stops. There are frequent strikes in Spain. In fact, one day, Betty tried to light a cigarette. The match wouldn't strike, and she turned to her friend and said, "This is the only thing that won't strike in Spain." And he said, "I'm going to use that in my newspaper, do you mind?" Now, she and Sir George are in the lift, and it's stuck between floors. They're trapped. These are the days when there was no telephone in an elevator, of course, and there's no way to contact the outside until hours and hours go by, and someone realizes you haven't returned home for dinner. After a while, Arthur notices that Betty has not come home that evening from her meeting with Sir George. So he goes to the place where he knows the meeting will take place. He sees that the elevator is stuck. He arranges to have someone open the top of the elevator so that Betty can climb out. Sir George is not able to make this climb, and he will spend the rest of the night in the elevator. They pass food and water to him. Betty goes on to meet with her young priest again. She notes that he's quite a handsome young priest. Wait for it. One day he requests that she meet him in another part of town. Now, this is not suspicious to Betty because priests are fearing great danger in Spain at this time. Priests have been arrested, so it's understandable he's looking for what she thinks is a safer place to meet. When she arrives at that part of town, she realizes it's really a part of town where people meet for secret lovers' meetings, and now she's a bit suspicious. She climbs the stairs to the room where he's waiting. When she arrives at the apartment, as he has directed her to, he is out of habit. He's really out of habit. But Betty falls into old habits. He confesses he has fallen in love with her. They fall into bed, but it's a mild affair. Meanwhile, she's still in love with Carlos. Apparently, she doesn't have an issue continuing the affair with the priest while she is still in love with Carlos and having the affair with Carlos. But the priest is besotted with her. He's going to leave the priesthood, and he wants to marry her. Oh, now this is more complicated than she would wish. No. You cannot. You should stay a priest. Really, I can't leave my husband. And whatever excuse she can use. The priest doesn't care. He's becoming reckless. He is actually arrested, not because of his affair with Betty, for other reasons, and she does what she can to have him released from prison. She feels badly. But this is also a good out for Betty because she encourages him to leave the area, to leave Spain for his own safety, and now she is done with this little entanglement. War is imminent in Spain. Carlos, her lover, of course, is married. His wife comes to see Betty one day. Carlos has been arrested. He's in prison. They don't know where. His wife is hysterical. Can't Betty help her? I don't think his wife knew at this point that she was having an affair with Carlos. Betty does try to find him. Through her efforts to find her true love, Carlos, she is accused of espionage by General Francisco Franco's military headquarters. She is not actually a spy at this point, but this is her first time that she'll be accused of espionage. Now, she meets John Leish, the charge d'affaires at the Chancery in Valencia. He's a very charming British man, and he's very sympathetic to Betty's plea to find Carlos. She uses her charm on him, not evident in this photo, but she uses her charm on him, and it works. They have a brief encounter. Betty was surprised by this encounter. She went to meet John Leish, and I I think she thought they were going to discuss finding Carlos. And he suddenly grabbed her, threw her down on the bed, and they made mad, passionate love. Betty was surprised, but, you know, it's apparently fine. Leish tells her he is madly in love with her. He doesn't care about his career. He wants only to be with Betty. Oh, Betty has to work hard to convince him that this affair is a mistake. No, we got carried away. No, he's in love with her. She goes to see Arthur. Arthur admits to her that he too has had an affair. Wife of a junior colleague. He wants to marry this woman he calls Maud. I shall call her Maud too, because I could not find out her real name. No one noted it in their diaries. Now it's 1937. Arthur is being posted to Warsaw. By the way, John Leish tried to follow Betty and was told he could not, under any circumstances, by the British Embassy. Arthur was furious when he found out that John meant to be with Betty forever. They're in Warsaw. Arthur is strained. He's stressed. He's madly in love with Maud. And the stress over the affair, the stress over his marriage with Betty sort of unraveling, he collapses. He continues working and then collapses again. Betty decides to wholeheartedly nurse him back to health. She cannot leave him now. She's going to make sure Arthur gets well. She sends him to England to recover, and she returns to Warsaw. Back in Warsaw, Betty refers to herself as a grass widow. She meets a young Polish diplomat, Edward Kulikowski of the Polish Foreign Office. They have an affair where they they not only make love, but they also discuss the German occupation of Austria. They would drive to the banks of the river Vistula, sunbathe naked, make love al fresco, and discuss the Anschluss. This is true. Oh well. Edward tells Betty many things. I love you, my darling. Hitler intends to invade Czechoslovakia. Oh, really? What? Betty is having a game of golf with her friend Jack Shelley. He's the controller in the passport office. And during the golf game, she tells him what Edward has told her about Hitler's plans to invade Czechoslovakia. I don't think she told him about the alfresco lunches on the banks of the river Vistula, but she says, I heard this. Jack says he is associated with the Secret Intelligence Service. This news will be helpful to them. By March 1938, she is actively gathering information for the SRS. They encourage her to use her romance with Edward to get more information. London instructs Jack Shelley to recruit her formally as an agent. They feel that her magnetism and charm will work well for them. Now she meets Michał Lubianski, the chef du cabinet to the foreign minister, Colonel Joseph Beck, in Poland. Betty works her magic on him, and soon he is chatting freely about Colonel Beck's contacts in Berlin and his daily secret communications with the Polish Foreign Office. Ah, Betty. At this time, she's practically the only agent in Poland providing important intelligence. She notes, it's easy to make highly trained, professionally closed-mouth patriots give away secrets in bed. Easy for her. She's got that magnetism. Betty is producing information that the Poles were reading the Enigma traffic. In fact, she gives SIS details on the Polish cryptoanalysis unit, where it's located, what kinds of messages they're intercepting. This information is very useful. Betty leaves Warsaw for England. She finds Arthur much recovered, and now he's being posted to Chile. She wants to go back to Poland. She wants desperately to go back to Poland. She writes that she's in love with Michał Lubianski. She wants to be with him. In fact, it's not only that. She wants to continue working for SIS. She loved doing this kind of work. It was exciting. It brings back the feeling she had in childhood of running until she was exhausted, or feeling afraid and reveling in that feeling. No, she can't go back to Warsaw. Her affair with Lubienski has made her a person of discussion there. She cannot return. So disconsolate, she goes to Chile with Arthur. She really wants to go back to assist the SIS. At a certain point, she decides she's kind of done with being a wife and mother. She leaves Arthur and her child Denise, doesn't look back, heads to Washington, D.C. She visits her mother in Washington, and she learns that a Mr. Howard is attempting to reach her. She meets with this Mr. Howard in New York City. He calls himself John Howard. Now, Mr. Howard is a frequent alias in SIS, and I think she probably knew that she was meeting with someone who was not actually called Mr. Howard. When she meets with him in New York, he tells her that she can be useful for them. He suggests that she take a house or apartment in Washington. In fact, he gives her a code name that will come directly, I believe, from William Stevenson himself. British Secret Intelligence. Cynthia. She likes the name Cynthia. It suits her. Yes. Yes, Mr. Howard, I will be Cynthia. He says, I want you to go down to Washington and rent a house. All right. Little house on O Street. I think he preferred it would be an apartment, but a house is fine. It's a secluded street, not a lot of traffic. This house will be useful to Betty. She's requested by Mr. Howard to contact Alberto Leis. Now, she hears this name and she says, oh, I've known him since I was a child. He was an admirer of mine. He called me his golden girl. Excellent. He is now the Italian naval attaché. So Betty contacts him, and she calls him at the embassy. She says, it's your golden girl, Alberto. Oh, yes, I remember those times long ago. Click, I can't talk to you now. Later, she gets a call at the house on O Street. It's Alberto. Oh, don't call me at work. Yes, I would like to see you. I do remember you. He comes to the house, and they have an affair. They start an affair. The affair consists mainly of them drinking fine red wine, talking, Betty undressing, Alberto lying next to her and fondling her naked body. But the talk is what he mainly desires, and Betty responds to that. This Cynthia is a good listener. She has always been a good listener, and now she knows this is what he needs. He just needs to talk. He needs to talk to a sympathetic, beautiful woman, lie next to her and gaze at her. That's fine with her. She asks him for something special. Oh, can you get something for me? I'm sure he's thinking, diamonds, chocolates, flowers. No, I'd like the Italian naval ciphers. Oh my darling. No, I can't get those for you. If you really think of me as your golden girl, honey. But he gives her the name of a man named Giulio, and he says, this man can help you. He's in love with her. And so she contacts Giulio, and she arranges for him to be paid for the naval code books to be copied and then returned. At this point, she starts noticing men sitting in a car outside the little house in Georgetown. Someone's watching her. Someone's noticing that foreign visitors are coming to the house. Sure they can imagine what's going on inside. At one point, Alberto says to her that the Italians plan to scuttle their ships in harbors in the United States. They're going to blow them up. Betty passes this information on, and some of these plans are thwarted. The FBI, though, will be a little issue for Betty. Hoover writes, "It is believed that a discreet inquiry of Mrs. Pack may produce valuable information, and the same is authorized. John Edgar Hoover." Oh, okay. It's 1941. Mr. Howard asks Betty to penetrate the Vichy embassy in Washington and obtain the cipher codes. They will, of course, rely on her to use her usual method. Betty has come up with a cover. She is going to pose as a freelance writer. She's going to contact the embassy. She looks at the embassy directories. She picks out a name. The press attaché is Captain Charles Bruce, and she calls, asks to speak with him. She gets a lower-ranking person there who says, no, he does not grant interviews. She says, well, I want to speak to Monsieur Henri Hay, and I want to interview him. You know, I'm a journalist. No. Bruce cannot. You will not speak to Bruce. You will not speak to Mr. Hay. No, it can't be arranged. He can't arrange anything like that. This is perfect for Betty. She waits about an hour. She calls again. This time she gets Captain Charles Bruce on the phone himself. She does a little teasing, flirting with him. She says, oh, I'd like to interview Monsieur Henri Hay, but I understand that that's not something that you're able to do, to arrange a, interview like this. Oh, Bruce's dander is up. What? Of course, he's furious, he's exploding. Of course I can. Yes, absolutely I can. So perfect. She gets the interview. She has about a 2-hour interview with Monsieur Hay, and she meets with the press attaché. Bruce is bowled over by her. She chose her outfit very carefully. She wore a green dress to match her sparkling green eyes. She used all of her flirting skills. And interestingly, she seems more interested in the attaché than she does the ambassador. Once Betty's turned her gaze on you, it's hard to escape that magnetic pull. She receives roses at her Georgetown home. Not only roses, but Charles Bruce shows up the next afternoon. As he walks into her home, he swoops her up in his arms and starts to carry her upstairs. She protests mildly, oh no, Charles, what are you doing? I am a married, yes. They make love, passionate love, in her bedroom, and now she becomes his mistress. She appears to his anti-Vichy sentiments. She can't let on that she's working for the British. She just can't. And there's an anti-British sentiment among the French. She knows that that won't be effective if she lets on. Charles Bruce had started working at the embassy in 1940, but he'd served in the French Air Force in World War I. He'd worked with the Anglo-French intelligence in World War II until France collapsed, and he had a newspaper string in France before he came to the embassy. So he's got a strong anti-British sentiment, but he also feels strongly that he's a Frenchman. And what's happening right now, Vichy France is officially the French state. Marshal Philippe Pétain's regiment from 1940 to 1944 during World War II. It's based in the small city of Vichy France, but Paris remains the official capital. Vichy only controls the unoccupied zone in southern France. So Germany's now occupying northern France, and the regime posts this embassy to Washington. And at first, the United States wasn't certain whether or not they should recognize this Vichy government, but they decide to do so. And they are now in a house on Wyoming Avenue. So Betty's been asked to establish a relationship, and she has, in fact, established a relationship. It's a good working relationship. But of course, now he doesn't know she works for British intelligence. Eventually, she tells him she's helping the Americans. Well, you know, that sort of appeals to him. Okay, that works. There's a problem now, though. Remember that the FBI... my technical skills come to the forefront. Oh, there we go. The FBI is watching her. They could unravel everything. What if they came to the house? In fact, they do. One day, when she was making love to Alberto Lays, the FBI actually knocked on the door. Lays panicked. And she had to let him out an upstairs window where he climbed onto the garage roof, scuttled along, and he wasn't in the best shape at this time, and he's kind of hanging onto the roof, and he had to drop to the ground. So Betty's worried about this happening again. She doesn't want this to happen to Charles. She doesn't want him to have to scuttle out the roof. So she's going to make a move. More discreet location. The Wardman Park Hotel on Connecticut Ave. This is perfect. In fact, it would have been better, I think, if she'd started here because it's got multiple entrances. It's interesting because Charles and his wife are actually living in an apartment in the Wardman. Which makes me think of Marx Brothers again. The wife is on one floor, the mistress on another. Now they're meeting at the Wardman Park. They're making love. My darling, Charles, I must have the naval ciphers. It is impossible. I'm not authorized to enter the code room. Please, Charles, please. This is the way we shall handle it. I will get into the code room. Okay, all right. So a plan is set afoot. Betty's contact with OSS is a Colonel Huntington. Now, she knows him as Mr. Hunter. He's going to organize this. It's not just going to be Betty and Charles Bruce who are going to go into the French embassy to get the naval codes. A gentleman called the Georgia Cracker will also assist them. I love that name. He's actually not from Georgia. He's a Canadian. I'm not sure how close he ever got to Georgia, unless he was arrested driving through and spent time in a prison there. But he's a safe expert. And I believe they called them Peterman or Petersman. I may be saying that incorrectly. Peter can help me with that later. This safe cracker, the Georgia Cracker, is going to open the safe. They're going to remove the code books. This is the plan. They're going to take them to a room that they have set up at the Wardman Park. Now, Betty was at the Wardman Park one day. Knock on the door. Exterminator! Really? She thinks it's the FBI. Who's knocking on the door? Exterminator. She opens the door. Man says, Exterminator, ma'am. Here to check for bugs. He comes in. He's with OSS. He goes over the room with a fine-tooth comb. No bugs. Okay. Thanks, ma'am. No bugs here. Okay, all right. They set up a safe room in another apartment. This is where the code books will be opened, photographed, and then dusted for fingerprints, all fingerprints removed, and then returned to the embassy. This is the plan. The problem is, at the Vichy embassy, there was a night watchman who had a very large guard dog. And Captain Bruce, Betty's appeal to his strong French sentiment, you'll help France, you'll be a patriot. All right, I'll do it. He tells the night watchman at the Vichy embassy that he's going to work late and his girlfriend will join him. That's way too many air quotes. But he tells the security guard, can you look the other way? I'm married. My girlfriend, this is the only place we can meet at the embassy, which is wartime Washington. I'm sure the guard must have known there were other places, but, he accepts that. For a few weeks in June of 1942, Captain Bruce and his girlfriend spend time on a sofa in his office. They are keeping up the fiction that they are having this affair at the office. But it works. The guard is used to seeing them. The dog is now used to them. Cynthia is worried about the guard dog, but she feels, all right, it's going to go well. And also, she's been given Nembutal to put to work in this operation. It's June 19th, 1942, the break-in. Cynthia and Charles arrive at the embassy. The OSS safe man, the Georgia Cracker, is going to be let in through a window. This is the plan. So they go in, they see the guard, everything is usual. Oh, nice doggy, nice, here. She gives the guard champagne. There's Nembutal in the champagne. She referred to it in her notes as something sleepy, but later she said that she knew it was Nembutal. So I think she did know she was putting Nembutal in the champagne. She put some in the dog's water dish. I have a poodle. This just breaks my heart. But actually, the dog was okay. It just got really sleepy, as did the guard. So now the Nembutal is taking effect. They're still on the couch. Everybody's falling asleep. The dog, the guard, perfect. They go to the window. They let the Georgia Cracker in. He's working on the safe. This is a really ancient safe. These locks are not tumbling like they should. He finally gets it open, but now it's around 4 a.m. There's no time to remove the books, get them to the wardman, photograph them, and get them back in the safe. No. They're going to have to go in again. Could Cynthia learn to crack a safe? Yes. Yes, she could. She's a game gal. Sure, she'll learn. The Georgia Cracker works with her, how to set the tumblers, how to remain calm while doing it. He can't go back the second time. It's just not going to work for him. Okay, they go back in a second time. Betty tries to get the safe open. She can't. She's been at it for a long time. Really? Okay. She's just upset. They know the FBI agents are across the street. They can see them watching the embassy. Betty hears the guard coming down the hall. Now remember, the second time they didn't drug the guard. They didn't drug the dog. Betty says to Charles, "Get undressed quickly." What? No, we're just pretending we're making love on the couch. No, they need to look realistic now. She takes off all her clothes, and she's wearing only pearls. Door opens, guard shines a flashlight on her. Betty is standing there, stark naked, pearls. Merde. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oops. He goes back out. She just throws on a slip. Charles wants her to get dressed. No, the slip is fine. Betty was the kind of girl who went shopping without underclothes on. If a girlfriend remarked to her, "Betty, you should wear underclothes," she would say, "It's wartime. I don't have time for things like that." So she can crack a safe in her slip. She's not worried about that. She starts working on the safe. She can't get it open. Really? All right. Now they're going to have to try another time. The Georgia Cracker will have to be enlisted again. He worked with her, but they know at this point they're going to have to go in another time. The next time the Georgia Cracker is in, he opens the safe. They get out the code books. They give him the code books. He hands them back to Cynthia. He drops out the window. This is like a 10-foot drop, and then she drops the books down to him. He takes the books to the Wardman Park. They are photographed. Fingerprints are wiped off. They are returned to the embassy. She puts them back in the safe. Oh, you little darlings. Spins the tumbler. Success. The cipher codes, once obtained and photographed, were sent to London. William Stevenson said they got them there within 24 hours. The OSS used them during the Allied North African landings. Success. Cynthia was eventually transferred to OSS from the British, and in fact, Bill Donovan, head of the OSS, approved her to continue working with the BSC until the end of the war. He felt that this collaboration had worked pretty well up to this point. Now, what to do about the Vichy embassy? So, they needed to remove staff from the Vichy embassy. Well, where could they put them? The Hotel Hershey. Now, you might think of Hershey candy, sweet chocolate. You may not know, or you may know, that during the war, Hershey made the bulk of their chocolate for the army. But they also housed the French diplomats. They housed the enemy. They kept them in the Hotel Hershey after they had to be removed from Washington, and they kept them there in style. Betty wanted to join Charles at the Hotel Hershey, so a story had to be concocted. She was going to pose as his long-lost daughter, of his wife's long-lost daughter. Now, his wife, believe it or not, was approached by intelligence, and she went along with this scheme. Her daughter had died. Betty would be posing as her late daughter. Charles, up to this point, wrote that he did not even know that she had a daughter. Secrets and lies, I love it. Oh, honey, by the way, I have a child I didn't tell you about. Oh, really, my lover will be posing as that. Pass the salt. So this is the plan. Betty's going to come to the Hotel Hershey. She'll live with her true love, Charles, and she'll pose as his daughter. This worked briefly at the Hotel Hershey, where you could live quite comfortably if you were enemy French. Flowers are delivered daily, all the food you want. Remember, there's rationing in wartime America, but everything they needed was given to them at the Hotel Hershey. And you could use a medical excuse to go into town anytime you wanted. And Betty used that all the time. She was staying at the Hotel Hershey, and she would say, I feel terrible. I need to get a tooth looked at. She goes into Harrisburg, probably meeting with intelligence, giving them information that she's acquired from listening to all these pro-Nazi sympathizers living in the Hotel Hershey. But then one day, Charles' wife catches Charles and Betty in bed. She rages. She rages so loudly you can hear it throughout the Hotel Hershey. Now Betty has to be sent away. And she tried to sneak back to see Charles at the Hotel Hershey. She was caught on the grounds, and they said, you have to leave. And she said, I'm just a naughty girl. Well, she was. Eventually, after the war, Betty and Charles were married. And he took her to his castle in Perpignan in France. And I want to say they lived happily ever after, but they did not really. So I'm going to end it here because it gets sad further on. So this is Cynthia. She wrote, I hope and believe I was a patriot. And I think she was. I think she was a success. I look at that face, I see her staring out at some unknown person through the years, and I think, oh, your story needs to be told. And who would be good to play her in a movie? My son said Steve Carell. I said, oh, I don't know, even with prosthetics, I don't know that I'd cast Steve Carell. So thank you for listening to the tale.
We're all seized with the movies. I think this is almost Downton Abbey and 50 Shades of Grey meet the Imitation Game.
I think so, yes. It feels very Downton Abbey to me, you know. I just think the whole, we're going to send your child away, you'll never see him again. A brief note about her child. She did see Tony as a young man before he shipped off to the Korean War. He had grown into a beautiful young person, and unfortunately he died. He died fighting to the very last minute. He died with honors, and he was a true hero, and so she felt comforted by that. But it just breaks your heart when you think about the baby being taken away from her, and it's so Lady Edith, I can't stand it.
Okay, questions for Natalie about Cynthia or Elizabeth?
We have one here, Peter.
Right there?
I guess I didn't remember from the beginning. What year was she born in?
She was born in 1910.
So she was in her early 30s during the 40s.
Yes. And age did not dim her, apparently. Even up to 1960, she was described as a very powerfully attractive woman.
What happened to her daughter, Natalie?
Her daughter died. Yeah, Denise was very unhappy. As you can imagine, your mother just abandons you in Chile and goes off to live her life. In some ways, I think Betty is almost repeating what Cora did to her. Cora ignored the children in favor of the social world, and Betty's really doing the same thing. She's able at some point to compartmentalize and to say, you know what, that part of my life, goodbye, done. Gonna go on and work with intelligence. It's almost as if Denise doesn't exist for her, and Arthur doesn't after that point.
Natalie, how did the diaries, how were they in possession of the family? Because you made a number of references to the diaries.
Yes, and I actually haven't had my hands on the actual diaries. I've just seen excerpts from them, and I think that the family has them.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
You're a great storyteller. Are you really not going to tell us the end of the story?
Well, I will tell you, but it's not sexy and it is sad. Betty and Charles were very happy in the castle for a while, and then Betty, the old restlessness crept back in. She wanted to be useful, and she was literally in a castle on top of a mountain. She was bored. She tried to alleviate that boredom as much as she could, keeping up with old friends in intelligence, lots of letter writing between her and Stevenson and other folks. But eventually she became ill, and she died it was a very slow and painful death. I told you it was sad. And then Charles also died not long after she did. He was electrocuted by his electric blanket, which then set fire to the castle. I told you it was awful. That's why I didn't want to tell you. When I read that in the notes, and I thought, oh my God, I'm ending it after Hotel Hershey. And then I said to my husband, your aunt's electric blanket that she gave us, that's never coming out of the package, by the way.
Okay. Right over here, yes.
Two questions. You started off talking about British intelligence using her, and then all of a sudden OSS. Was there did they basically pass her over to OSS?
They were cooperating at that point,
Okay.
and I think it was a mutual benefit for them to work together on this. And I believe OSS might have had something, I can't confirm this, might have had something to do with the FBI detail that watched the embassy not being as alert as they should have been, because certainly if you're FBI and you're watching people every night going into the embassy, this couple, that would be someone to...
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I believe later on the FBI may have bugged her hotel room, but I'm not 100% certain on that. But that would make sense to me if they would go in.
And the second question is, did her father or her mother have lots of money? Because it sounds like they really had... He was not just a military officer.
Yeah, they did well. They did well. I mean, they were in Newport, Rhode Island, where they had their summer house. They really moved in yachting circles, and that requires, those boats require a lot of money. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
We have one back. Nope. Oh. Already?
Back there, is there? Amanda?
It was already answered.
Right there, one over here.
Okay, we'll get to you.
And then I think there's one here.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Over 20 years ago, I read Mary Lovell's book, Cast No Shadow, and I was wondering what you thought of that book.
I did look at that book. I got a sense that she did not really like her subject, but I mean, it's thorough and it's beautifully detailed. But there's a sense that as I read that book that she wasn't that fond of Betty. And for the first moment I started reading about Betty, I thought, oh, I just love this woman. And that sort of comes across to me in the book. But I mean, it's beautifully, beautifully detailed. It's worth reading. It's called Cast No Shadow. And there's one that's out of print by Montgomery Hyde, Cynthia, but you can get it through, I don't want to plug anybody, but Amazon. That's also really good. And it's very conversational, the Hyde book, because he's talking with Betty shortly before she dies, and she leaves a lot of things out. She's, because she's still in her flirtatious mode, and she wants to, I think, come across well to Hyde. So she's not as detailed about certain things that, he probably was more interested in. She never named her lover Carlos to him. She kept referring to him as Antonio.
Yes, right here.
Was there an exchange of embassy personnel between the Vichy and our embassy in Paris, or were they kept prisoners the whole war?
Oh, well, they were kept prisoners the whole time, and then some of them who wanted to become Americans were allowed to do so. Some were Monsieur Henri A, and a lot of his senior staff were shipped off to Warm Springs to a hotel there because the people of Hershey, understandably, were less than thrilled. Stories are circulating through Hershey and Harrisburg about how the French are living in the hotel, things that they're getting to eat that you can't get in Hershey. And I think after a while, after certain things went on and how people were very open with their pro-Nazi sympathies, it was deemed that maybe they should be moved out of Hotel Hershey. And then I think by 1943, 44, Hotel Hershey goes back to being a proper hotel, which I'm sure the people of Hershey, whew.
Okay. Natalie, thank you so much for a fascinating story. And let me again thank the Smithsonian volunteers for joining us throughout the whole series. Thank you. All right. Have a great rest of your day. Be careful on the red line. Okay.